Coming up on More Than Before.
We're struggling right now. Keep your nose down. Keep doing what you got to do. Keep doing the right stuff. There's light at the end, man. But God's got this in hand. You're going to come out of this okay.
This is More Than Before with Nathan Cook.
Hey everyone, welcome back. I am super excited for my guest today. He is in studio, which is really exciting. He's a wealth of knowledge. He has so much wisdom. He's a wonderful friend of mine. He's currently retired with over 40 years in the custom cabinetry industry. He has a huge heart for strengthening and encouraging young men. He's a father, he's a husband for over 47 years, which is pretty incredible. He has a huge heart to encourage others. I love him so much. He's my good friend, Mark Carman. Welcome to the show, brother.
Brother, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm happy to be here and look forward to our conversation. I hope it's not too revealing.
Yeah. Don't worry. We'll put clothes on later.
Oh, okay. Thank you for the invite.
I mean, we've known each other for quite a while, which is kind of crazy to think about. I think like 7-8 years, somewhere around there.
Something like that.
And we met originally on a worship team.
Mm-hmm.
I was playing guitar and got kicked off because I wasn't good enough. Jason. No, just kidding. No, but one of the things I love is your passion for rhythm. I don't know. There's kind of a rhythm to you. There's a rhythm to your life, and I'm excited to dive into your story. I am curious before we go into the past. I know you're retired right now.
Yes.
You are doing things, so you're not dead.
Mm-hmm.
You are.
Not yet.
You are keeping busy. What are you doing nowadays? What are you occupying your time with?
Well, like you talked about worship team. I'm still playing music. I'm getting to spend a lot more time these days, Nathan, with hanging out with these young guys you talked about, doing some mentoring, that kind of thing, being really more intentional with it. That's a word that popped into my head a few years back. I was sharing that with Jason, our friend, and it was just turning over the new year. It was like 3 or 4 years ago, and when New Year's comes around, you have all your resolutions. I'm going to do this. I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to enter a strongman competition. I'm going to do all these. I didn't do that one. But the word that popped into my head was intentional. And so I started thinking about that more and more. And this was coming right on the beginning of my retirement time. So I had to reflect on what am I going to do in my retirement? What's that going to look like? And being more intentional with young men and it's been an interesting journey in that way, and because I keep meeting these young guys unintentionally.
Yeah, they kind of just follow.
They just kind of happen.
Path.
Yeah, but God puts them there, and so with that, then comes the intention. At that point, I figure, okay, Lord, you brought this guy along. There's a reason why this guy's introduced us beyond just talking about our dogs, or which we do.
Yeah.
But anyway, I find myself being more involved with that. I want to get more involved with volunteering, although I think we talked about my dislike of the word
volunteering.
Volunteering, yeah. It's because of other stuff. That's another whole conversation probably. But anyway, getting involved with my community, getting involved in Hillsborough, cleanup crews, whatever kind of things like that, with my other spare time.
Yeah.
But my bigger focus right now is on people, and especially young guys that are going through stuff. I find I have a heart for that. Guys that are going through a difficult time. Because of my life experiences, I think I have things to offer these guys. Just because of the stuff I've been through in my own life and what God has shown me and taught me through those things, even though I was not being taught at the time. Yeah. I didn't pick up the lesson when it was happening. I picked up the lesson 15 years after that, after banging my head against a wall a few more times, then the stuff stuck. But
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's good. It's good to finally come around and learn the lesson eventually.
Right.
Some of us don't learn the lesson, and we see that repeated over and over and over again.
Yes.
Yeah. So I want to go back childhood. So I know you're the oldest of three.
Yes.
What kind of a child were you? Like, who was Mark Carman growing up as a kid?
I was I'm the oldest of three. My mom repeatedly told me, even as an adult, that I was always the easiest one. I was the one that was always wanting to help out. I was the one that would help her wash dishes and pick up our toys and stuff and look after my little brother who was a year younger than me. In fact, like I was saying earlier, my little brother, who's a year younger than I am, didn't start talking until he was like 2.5 or 3 years old. And the reason was I would interpret for him.
You were the mouthpiece.
I was the mouthpiece. So if my brother wanted something, he would just simply point and grunt. And my mom would ask me, his name is Stanley, and she used to call him Stanny. So what does Stanny want? I said, well, he wants an apple or a drink of water, or he wants to go play with that thing over there. And so why bother learning how to talk?
Yeah.
If you got this guy over here who will say everything you want, why should I bother learning how to talk? So I was that kid. And that turned into be problematic as I got older because of wanting to be the compliant child. That as things changed in our family and I got older, that tendency to be compliant and make people happy didn't work out so good for me. Because if I don't listen to you, if I don't hear your story and what's going on with your life, then what I have to say about my life experience that may or may not apply to you won't matter. If I can't hear, because any application, any kind of application in life, a message at church, advice from a friend, is only going to be applicable if the person is paying attention and listening, and I'm not going to have any credibility with that person if the other guy doesn't know that he's valued, and if I spend the whole time talking about me, how am I making you feel valued?
Yeah.
If I'm not listening to what you have to say and the things happening in your life, and I'm just telling you, here's what I would do, Nate. If I'm not listening to you, you're not going to feel value. If I'm not paying attention to you and giving you space, you're not going to feel value.
Yeah. And I think a lot of us as kids growing up, we kind of experienced that with our families, and even with our peers, of where we just don't feel heard. People are constantly talking at us, and there's kind of this piece almost where I've found that there are many people who spend a lot of their time listening because they never felt like they were heard in their younger years of life. So you grew up in San Diego, California. What were some of the things that you got into as a kid when you were in San Diego?
Living in San Diego, when I lived there, I was born in 1953, when the world was still in black and white. Growing up in San Diego at that time, it was not like it is now. It was just a beach town. And the area I lived in, there were a lot of orange groves, tomato fields, a lot of agriculture down there. And so as I grew up, the area developed more. It was one thing to grow up as a kid there and ride your bike for, you've heard stories about this. Mom would never check on us. She'd say, come back when the street lights come on. You've heard stories like this from guys my age forever. But that's what it was like. Yeah. We would go down and ride 4 or 5 miles, go take our bikes into the canyon, and not come back until we got hungry. It was a whole different time back then. And then growing up at that time too, growing up in the 60s and 70s was a unique time to be a young person with all the things that were happening at the time. Vietnam was going on, and the civil rights movement was going on, and JFK got shot, and Martin Luther King got shot, and Robert Kennedy got shot, and all these things were happening before I even got out of high school. Yeah. So all this stuff in Vietnam is going on. There's a lot of stuff going on that we were, at that age, oblivious to. When Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, I wanted to go out and ride my bike. My parents made me stay there and watch it. To me, it's like, I can see this on science fiction theater.
Yeah.
Any day. Why am I? And it's not even a good picture. So things like that, growing up like that at that time, I didn't appreciate growing up the way I did until I was grown up. Looking back on it and looking back on the things I experienced, the nuclear family was not the same family that we have these days.
Yeah.
Growing up the way I did with the people I did in the area that I did, San Diego's a Navy town. So with that, And also it's a border town.
Yeah.
So with all those things, there was a real mix of cultures and races and nationalities. And so growing up in the area I did, even though it wasn't always easy, because the neighborhood I lived in, looking back on it, I didn't think of it at the time, was a scary neighborhood, sketchy a little bit. But growing up through that time, I think it gave me a very good appreciation of the differences in people. And my parents worked hard at that too, as far as respecting people individually, respecting people just because they're people, not looking down on somebody who was different than me, who didn't have what I have, and not being envious of people who had more than I had. You know, it was a different time to grow up.
I love that aspect of your story because, you know, so many people who have gone through that, you don't hear, like you hear kind of the one-off stories of, you know, when I was a kid, this was happening, that was happening. It's really cool to actually get to be with people who have experienced, I mean, you've experienced a breadth of life, like a huge breadth. It's like, you know, when you think of JFK, when you think of Vietnam, when you think of all these different components that kind of go into one person's life, that's a lot of life and a lot of lessons that have kind of come out of your life. I'm curious. So let's say high school, like who were you in high school? Were you the bookworm? You started martial arts at one point, which we kind of had that affinity. Like what were kind of your earlier years with like being in high school? Like what did you find yourself doing? What were you interested in back then?
I was a kind of a dork, not unlike now, Nathan, but even more so. I've kind of grown out of some of my dorkiness as I've gotten older, but it lingers. But I was not a very confident kid in junior high and high school with my home life and all that. But with those things, I did not grow up with a lot of confidence. So I wanted to be a certain kind of guy in school, but I didn't have the boldness to be that guy. I had groups that I had an affinity for, and I would hang out on the fringe of those groups, the surfer crowd, the hippies, these guys, the intellectuals. I had different groups that I felt an affinity for. I was not defined enough as a person to say, yeah, that's me. These are the kind of guys that I want to be or that I'm like.
Yeah.
You know, so these things didn't come out until I didn't start really being Carman, I don't think, until I was around 25 years old, 30 years old, because of all these other things. That was the time I started doing martial arts. And that was a very defining time in my life because I was afraid of that too. You know, I was a fearful kid growing up. I think martial arts was a turning point for me. Although I didn't mention that to you earlier, looking back on it, it was a thing that gave me a lot of confidence in a lot of ways.
I think martial arts really does, especially like there is some aspect to learning how to defend yourself that gives you confidence, but there's a confidence of doing something repetitively and becoming good at it.
Yeah.
Especially something that involves body mechanics. That's something that I think a lot of people don't understand. Like within the martial arts world, you have to be very self-aware, meaning you have to know where your finger is, where your fist is, where your knee is, like at all time. Like you're very hyper aware of where your body is in space. And so I think that because you are so in tune in that way, it does give you a confidence. I do want to kind of rewind just slightly because you were talking about family dynamics and finding, you were talking about the nuclear family, which, you had the nuclear family, but from the outside, especially back in those days, it was always about face value. Like you always want to look good on the outside, have that nuclear family where everything looks perfect, but behind closed doors, not everything is as great as it seems, right?
Right.
What was that family dynamic for you growing up? Because, you and your dad had a little bit of a strangeness between you, didn't you?
Yeah, well, and I hope, I didn't talk to my brothers about this. I have two brothers, right?
Yeah.
And we all grew up in the same family. And we all have a different relationship with my dad. And I didn't talk to them about being on this show, but we've all talked openly about what we went through and how we dealt with things. Now, those things said, the family I grew up in and the dynamic in my household, I found out in later years was not so unique. It's unique to you when you're in it, And as you said, you're behind closed doors.
Yeah.
So what I am out in my driveway and what I am in my house and the way my family looks getting into the car compared to going back in the house, getting out of the car.
Yeah.
Not the same thing. So growing up with that, my dad struggled with alcohol during the formative years of my life. So I think he started drinking when I was around 12 years old. And with that, with his alcohol dependence came behavioral changes. And it was not easy to be in the house sometimes. My dad would get angry. And so growing up with that, now I'm the compliant child, keep in mind. So we all dealt with these things differently. I was the oldest, first of all. Which I still am, by the way.
You still have that on
I'm
them.
still the oldest. So, but growing up as the oldest, and I was by my nature a peacemaker. So there's making peace and there's making peace. Keeping the waters still is not always a good thing. You know, if you're keeping waters still, there's still dangerous things underneath that water that's not beneficial. You need to address the dangerous things that are below the surface. And that was not happening. So for me, not wanting to be a troublemaker, wanting things to be quiet, I did whatever I need to do to appease my dad, whatever that might be. Mark, I need you to do this, or I need you to do that, or it might not even be a directive from him. I might just say, okay, this is not going well. I need to get out of here. I need to go do whatever I need to do to keep myself safe and keep peace. My middle brother and my dad had similar personalities, so they would go toe-to-toe often. My little brother, who's 5 years younger than me, we had a very classic dynamic. So my little brother, the youngest kid, the third child, is the one that's kind of invisible. So he was kind of invisible in all this. So he did not deal with a lot of the repercussions involving my dad directly. It was more for him not being noticed. So when all these things were going on, Chris was kind of over here to the side, not being affected in the same way. So the dynamic, the picture, what's funny about this, Nate, as you talk about this, is that I think about when you're talking about the nuclear family, the picture in my mind, I always call it living in the Leave It to Beaver days. I don't know if you've ever seen that show, but that's how it was. You know, dad goes to work. This was my dad's perception as well. Dad goes to work, you come home, and then you put your feet up, and you're done.
Be served.
Yeah, and that manifested itself in a lot of different ways as time went by and the drinking became worse. It came out in different ways, which is probably not too good to get into. I don't want my brothers to, if they ever hear this, to be, you shouldn't have said that stuff about Dad. But there was self-destructive things that went on, and also destructive things that happened in the family as a result. My mom and dad got divorced when I was in my late teens, 17, 18, something like that. And then my dad went on his own, and my mom started a new life on her own. She was a working artist, and she would go to art marts on the weekend to sell her work to support the family. I stayed home. I had a part-time job, and I was trying to help my mom out with that. My middle brother was already married. He got married pretty young. And then my little brother, of course, he's just over here on the side. And
well, I think it gives a lot of context to your life and kind of what you experienced growing up, because I think truly early on in life we pick up a lot of baggage, right?
Yeah.
You know, our good friend Gunnar, which many of you guys have actually seen on the show, which is kind of this homage, which, by the way, you know, if you've watched that episode, we talk about the backyard. This is Mark. Mark has the backyard.
Yes.
So when we get to go over to his place and have a whiskey and have a cigar, like, Mark has been really intentional to create an environment for guys to come to kind of be themselves, to truly just show up and to be real, right? And I think that's really fascinating about your story, because we all have baggage. We all come to life with some kind of baggage. And it's really a question of how do we put that baggage down over time.
Yeah.
You were mentioning, 17 years old, your parents get divorced, and not long after that, you had a pretty radical transformation in your life of coming to know
meeting Jesus.
Yeah. Which is, I was curious about some of the mentors that you have had in your life, and I think, definitely coming to your faith is going to be a big thing. But you also mentioned a mentor of yours, which I'm really curious about. He had taught you the difference between love and free love.
Mr. Nierodzinski.
You had a conversation with him about the difference between love and free love, which is interesting to me because in that era, free love was a big thing.
Yeah, that's why.
Love is for everyone, and go out and have a good time.
It was a great conversation, brother. I tell you, this why this guy stuck in my head. I only had this guy for one semester in 8th grade, I think. He was my. It was either graphic arts or industrial arts. And one of our projects was to do silkscreen, which I think they still do. So it was silkscreen, and we had to come up with our own design, and it could be if we're going to put it on T-shirts or jackets, whatever we're going to do. So this is in 1965, 66, and it was the middle of Vietnam and protesting and the hippies. And the Jesus movement was just starting to get off the ground a little bit. It hadn't happened yet. And so what was on the news every day were hippies protesting and talking about peace and free love. And this is back in the days of Jimi Hendrix. These guys were all, at that time, Santana, the Beatles, all these guys were coming out. And they were all preaching the same thing.
Just small little bands.
Some of these little bands were out at that time. So at that time, I had a lot of admiration for the hippies and with this whole thing about peace and free love and the peace symbol and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So I designed this logo, this thing I wanted to do a silk screen of, and I was going to put it on my mom had one of my dad's when he was younger, he was in the National Guard, Air National Guard, and he had a jacket, his military jacket, and I was going to use that because that was also a big thing, was to use military uniforms.
Yeah.
To put peace symbols on, the whole paradox of that.
Like counter.
Yeah.
Intuitive. Yeah.
So with that, I presented my idea. Here I got this peace symbol with peace and free love. And he says, I don't think we should put that on your jacket. Do you know the difference between love and free love? No. So he proceeded to explain it to me. It's in 1965, 66, to a 13-year-old. Right? My mom and my dad had never talked about it, and they didn't have any issue with me putting that on the jacket. But he said, I can't approve that. I can't let you do that. He says, if you modify it and take the free part off of that, you can say peace and love, but you can't put free love on there. And I said, okay. And I understood why he did it. It didn't impact me at the time. It impacted me after I met Jesus in 1971. 1972, and all this was still happening. That was when the Jesus movement was in full swing. Mm-hmm. And the hippies were getting saved. And these were my idols, these hippies, By the way, I was only a hippie in here. I would never, going back to my timidity, I never had the boldness to actually step out and be a real hippie.
Yeah.
I didn't smoke dope, didn't do drugs, didn't sleep around, all the stuff that they were doing. I was too afraid to do it. I was invited to do it, but I was too afraid to do any of that stuff. And when I went to college, the same thing, too afraid. I think God did put that fear in me on purpose to save me from a life of torment. But anyway, so when I got saved, when I met Jesus in 1972, and I started to understand who Jesus was and the impact he was having on my mind, Mr. Nierodzinski came back to my memory. I thought, oh yeah, I wonder if he was a believer, or if he was just a stand-up guy. That's one of those things you just take away. You never really understand the impact of it until maybe later on. Yeah. And then you said, that guy, that was a good dude right there. And that guy and my Taekwondo instructor spent the time to say the words to me, knowing me a little bit. They were both very intuitive men, and took the time to put the brakes on for a second, hit the pause button, and take me in tow.
I am curious because I love the picture you kind of paint of, coloring in the lines. You could almost say like the majority of your life has been coloring in the lines, and most people that would look at you would go, oh, well, he's got it all together. Like things are good. When it comes to like Jesus, when it comes to realizing like, oh, like, you think of like the serial killers and like, oh yeah, they really need to repent and they need to find Jesus. Like, Well, Mark, like you're pretty well off. Like why do you need to know Jesus? Like you seem like you're doing pretty well in life. Like why? What was the point for you when you realized that you needed to have a relationship with Jesus versus, the massive crazy story of, you weren't like a druggie or a hippie that needed to be
I was
your
a pretty
life.
good kid.
Yeah. So why the need to have a relationship with this guy, Jesus?
There was something missing for me, Nate. When I was in high school with all these different groups I wanted to be a part of, one of those groups was because Jesus movement was happening then too. This is back in 67, 68, and kids were getting saved. And I wasn't having that. I was an atheist at the time. I thought an intellectual. And I used to hang around with those guys. I had some good buddies who were also atheists, proud atheists. And we would get in arguments and discussions with these new believer friends of ours, because these are friends that we'd known for a long time. Yesterday you were like me. Now today you're talking about Jesus. So what's up with that? So we started talking about those things. And my friend Carl was a really sharp dude. And he ridiculed him. He outsmarted them. He put them down. All these things, and I admired that. So then we graduated. 1971, I graduated high school, and we all went our different ways. Carl's going to go to college over here, and I'm going to go to college over here, and we're all in the same area.
Yeah.
But we're in different campuses, so we don't have the day-to-day continuity we used to have. So the summertime comes and goes. We get into school, and we're on neighboring campuses. I'm going to school over on this campus. That was at San Diego State before it was a university. It was San Diego State College back then. So I'm going to that school. Carl's going to they called them junior colleges back then, but a community college.
Yeah.
And we would get together for lunch. Now, we had a mutual friend named Debbie who had always been a believer, but we liked her anyway. We let her be our friend. So with that, Carl and Debbie would come and join me for lunch. Well, I come to find out over the summer, Carl got saved.
Uh-oh. Wah, wah, wah.
So Carl and Debbie would come have lunch with me, and I'm holding out, brother. I'm not going to go into that boat. So
you might sink their boat and bring them back over.
Yeah. So they come over to have lunch, and they would come over every day at lunchtime, and they would get their Bibles out, start reading their Bibles and talking back and forth. And Carl, with his intellect, started to apply studying the Bible in the same way he did everything else. So he dove deep into that. I'd sit there and do my homework while they were doing their Bible stuff over there on the side. And after about 6 months of that, I was walking home from one of our lunches. And of course, I'm listening to things they're saying while I'm doing my homework. Walking back to my car, and everything they were saying just clicked and made sense. While I was walking back, I was thinking about the latest, I don't even remember what scripture they were talking about that day, but the accumulation of the Bible and the Bible and the Bible, and hearing them talk and praying over lunch. Walking back to my car one day, what they were saying and how my life was going, I knew that what they were saying was right. I could not explain it in a logical, rational way. I just knew that there was something in my life that was not right. I wasn't a bad guy, like you said.
Yeah.
I wasn't.
Everyone would say you're a good guy.
Yeah. What do you need God for? Yeah. You're not sinning.
Yeah.
But it made sense. And I just, in my own way, I just talked to Jesus right then on my way back to my car and accepted him into my heart. And there was no fireworks. I didn't get slammed on the ground.
No tearing of like...
No. No scales fell from my eyes. I didn't stop being who I was.
Yeah, the light turned green and you just kept...
Yeah. My life did not change drastically. In fact, for probably the first couple of years I was a believer, I really struggled. Struggle's not the right word. I wasn't even conscious of trying to be different than I was. I got plugged in with a Bible study group, and these were all guys. I got invited to this group, and when my first night there, I saw all these guys I knew from high school who were in the atheist group And now they're all saved. So now I go, oh, these are my boys.
Yeah.
So we started hanging out, and the guy that led the group was an old man named Harley Cahill. And we were all college people with this old dude. And Harley just had a heart for young people. And he hosted this Bible study, and he did it for probably 5 or 6 years before he got too old to do it. And it was the best foundation I could possibly have for getting my feet wet in the faith, was this guy. And these people, they were challenging.
Yeah.
These were all, they used to call them back in the days fundies, fundamentalists, and intellects. So they're arguing with Harley. Harley would say something, they'd argue back, and it was the best climate to grow up in, especially when you're first meeting the Lord and just getting to know somebody.
What I really love about your story is the fact that there are so many people today that have different opinions on different things, whether that's political or spiritual differences. But there's a lot of people that we meet on a day-to-day basis nowadays where you can't be friends with someone who has a different belief than you.
Yeah,
you can't be in the same room with that person. And what I love is, we have this backyard thing that you put on once a month. And what I love about that is it's guys from all over the place. Some are believers, some aren't. Some have hard backgrounds, some have good backgrounds. Like, you're all over the place.
Yeah.
And yet you've created this space for people to come and to truly just exist. Community has been kind of a huge thing for you throughout your life. What is community done for you, and why do you intentionally create that wherever you go?
Being in community for me is part of how God made me to be. It's part of my purpose. By my nature, you know me for a while, by my nature, I'm a pretty outgoing guy, and it's necessary for me to exercise my gifts in a community setting. By my nature, by my gifting, I'm an encourager, exhorter, helper. My wife has a gift of hospitality. I suffer through that with her. My wife, as you know, is a beautiful lady, and she's an introvert, which you would not know by when the guys come over and they all want to spend more time talking to her than me. That's part of the community thing. My desire to do what I do in the backyard, I think, Nathan, comes from my own years of not having a place to do that for myself, having a safe place where I could talk about my stuff, whatever kind of crap I'm going through, whatever kind of thing I'm being challenged by or struggling with, not knowing a safe place to do that in, where I could just relax and just be myself and not be judged, not be compared to or against, not having to be afraid of saying the wrong thing unless I'm being a kabuno. And we all know there's no kabunos in the backyard.
Yeah. Which for all of you listening, like tell them what kabunos.
This is a word.
No kabunos is.
This is a word we learned from our friend Gunnar, and it's a Rwandan word for asshole. So that's the one rule in the backyard: is it no assholes?
Yeah.
No kabunos. You can have. Thank you for asking that question, because the backyard has been so fundamental in expressing my faith. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
The fact that this is the way I view people because of how I grew up, with the hardness too, but with that as well, because I believe the things we go through, the hard struggles we go through yesterday and way yesterday, are what make us who we are today. Right? We're all creatures of our environment and the way God made us. A combination of those two things. So the things we experienced growing up are also forming our minds and our concepts of the world and our next door neighbor, all those things. Having a place where guys could come from all different backgrounds like that and just be. We've both been there nights when our friend Lamont, for example, who comes from Northeast Portland, just comes because there's so much demanded of him in his day-to-day life. He just comes to have a cigar and a drink, and sometimes he never says anything. He'll just sit there and be with the guys. We've had guys like that. Some nights they're very loquacious and want to talk about all the stuff and tell jokes. And other guys just sit over on the side over here by the fire pit and are just quiet. There's not a lot of places guys can do that.
And it's crazy too, because when you think about this concept of the backyard that we're talking about, most people, like you guys get together, you guys drink, and you guys have cigars, and that's okay, whatever. But no, it's not just that. Like when you say no kabunos, like the point is we jive with each other, we give each other little sucker punches there and there, like, hey, and we kind of laugh it off. But if there's anything in malice, that's not tolerated. Right. You can't be in there. No. And it is a very well known law in the backyard. Like it's even written on a plaque at your house now, no kabunos. And so this environment is very open. Not only that, but there have been moments where people will break out a guitar and everyone is singing. Yeah. There's videos of the backyard of some different people just singing. Yeah. And everyone breaks in. And we're not talking like worship songs like from church. We're talking about just like everyday songs. Yes, that we're just a community of guys getting together, having some kind of fellowship. Yeah. To be able to connect with other people. And you don't necessarily have to be there to pour out your heart. Sometimes just being there in community is really important. And I love that because you have been really intentional about that. I think that maybe in the back of your mind, maybe that wasn't the original purpose behind the backyard was, hey, I need this for myself. But it was also really just seeing it in other men's lives and saying, you know what, you need to be in community. Yeah. And not just men, people in general. Like if you're a woman, if you're a man, you need to have community in your life. Surround yourself. And not just because we live in a virtual world, a digital world where it's so easy. Oh yeah, I saw Mark from across, the way. Mark lives an hour away from me. And yet we will still get coffee, we'll still hang out, we'll catch up with one another. And afterwards, it's so filling. Yes. You walk away just full of life when you get to hang out with Mark. And I think you guys experience that too when you guys are hanging out with people that you know, like, and trust in proximity. Now you've walked with Jesus for 50 years. Mm-hmm. You've been married almost as long, 47 years, which is quite amazing. Yeah. I'm curious for you, when you first got married, who were you in your marriage?
I was such a child.
And who are you today in comparison to that man? Because we really do find ourselves when we get married, and I've said it a million times, but I was selfish. I didn't realize how selfish I was when I first got married. But I'm curious, what were some of those things that you look back and go, man, this was who I am back then, and thank goodness my heart has changed. Thank goodness I'm not that same guy.
It's a miracle that I'm still married because of me. When I first got married, and I don't know. I think a lot of guys think the same way. When I first got married, I was 23 when I got married. So in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, and so many things are going through my mind right now, Nathan. When I first got married, I assumed, because I'm getting married, I'll be a good husband. I'll know how to be a good husband. Because I'm getting married.
Yeah, you get the title.
Automatically, you just will be a good husband. Yesterday, I was living for me. Today, I'm going to live for my wife. Right? Yeah. That's a natural segue. It's an easy transition. No. So when I got married, the concept in my mind was, okay, great. And I'm going to get married. First of all, there's going to be unlimited sex. So that's there on the table. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And for the first year, we lived in an apartment because we wanted to be carefree. My father-in-law wanted to help us get into a house. Let's go look for a house for you. No, we don't want to do that right now. We don't want to have to worry about house payments and mowing the lawn. And the apartments have a pool, and that's what we want to do. So for the first year, that was my life. And up until 6th year of marriage, there was a slowdown. There was a recession in California, and I was out of work for a while. I had some side work built up, and I told my boss, I was the foreman at the time of the shop I was at. I told my boss, well, Manny, I've got some side work. Let me take a voluntary layoff, and then when work picks back up, bring me back in. I've got some side work that can keep me going. Well, I got the side work done, and I found out a good thing about myself, Nathan, is I'm not a self-motivator. You've had some guys on the show that have companies, yeah, let's just go do it. I wasn't like that. If the work came to me, I was happy to do it. Yeah. But to promote myself,
diligence,
promote myself and go out and This is who I am. This is what, no. But if it came to me, great. And if the work wasn't there, I was content to sit around the house and maybe I'll go work out. I had a pull-up bar in the backyard. I'll go out and work out for a while, or I'll play with the kids, or I'm going to go out and lay out in the sun for a while. San Diego, after all, right? And all the time I'm doing this, I have no idea what it's doing to my wife. It's crushing her. I had no idea. Later on, as time went by, she came to me and she says, you know what? I don't think I love you anymore, and I really don't like you very much either. I don't know if I want to stay in this relationship. And I was shocked. This is how thick I was, right? You would put two and two together. No. I was in shock. And so I started to turn things around. And as a result of that, my job came back. I was able to go back to the shop again and get back to work again. And it took a couple of years for Melissa to develop confidence in me again and to feel close to me again. And I was okay with her taking as long as she needed to take, because I knew what I had done to put us in the situation we were in. 1 year, Nathan. Now we're in our house by now. We're making house payments. We got
You're locked
homeowners
in.
insurance. We got obligations. We're paying utility bills and stuff, you know. So the year I was laid off, we made $7,000.
Wow.
In the whole year, and didn't lose our house. It was a miraculous thing. We had one day where we had no money. We had like $5 and we were out of food. And I'm thinking, well, we have not got enough food to go buy groceries. So that day, one of my neighbors down the street had a vegetable garden in his backyard, and he had a bumper crop and he says, we can't eat all this. Can you guys use some vegetables? Well, yeah.
Well, I mean, if
we'll
you
take them
got
off
it,
your
yeah.
hands. I hate to see you throw them away. And then about an hour and a half later, another friend of ours had a neighbor who was moving and had a freezer full of meat, and said, I got to get rid of this meat because we're moving. Can you know anybody who can use some steaks and some hamburger and some this and that? Yeah, we can. I hate to see you throw it away. So we had groceries. Not long after that, I was able to go back to work again. But that's an example, looking back, that's an example of how the Lord sustained us and got us through some hard times. But those are the things, Nate, looking back on those things, these were seasons that grew us as believers and grew us as a couple. And these are the things, the difficulties I went through at that time. What's that scripture say in Romans about God causing all things to work for the good?
Yeah.
Even things like that. When you talk about my mentoring young men and my intentionality, those are the tools I use. Those are the examples I use for these young guys I talk to. Man, I'm down on work right now. We had to move in with my mother. You know, I'm talking with a guy like that right now. That's awkward. It's him and his wife, and they got a couple of kids and have to move in with mom. And his mom and him don't get along that great. So, but this is what it has to be. So we got together and I got to share with him some of my stuff. So the things we go through, the tough things that I go through, when you go through them, I can say, Nate, there's light at the end, man. Just keep your nose down. Keep doing what you got to do. Keep talking with your wife. Keep doing the right stuff. You're going to come out of this okay. Everything's going to be all right. And that's the thing I think about. We're struggling right now, but God's got this in hand, and everything's going to be all right. And these are the things I tell these guys. I know it looks dark right now. I know you don't know how you're going to do it. I know you and your wife are not getting along. I know you and your son are estranged. I talked to a guy at church yesterday, a guy I got a huge respect for. We had not talked in a long time. I said, how you doing, man? He goes, well, I'm good, but my son wants nothing to do with us. We haven't talked to him in 3 years. He goes, I have 2 grandchildren I don't even know. They live one town away from each other, 10 minutes away from each other. And I got to talk with him and just say, look, man, I know it looks really dark right now, but God can turn these things around. Let me share with you something that happened with me and how things are in the process of turning around with a relationship. And I said, God can do it, Harry. You got to continue to stay on your knees, brother. Stay on your knees, keep praying. God can do these things. You got to keep the faith and keep your eyes there. Don't look at the dark stuff all the time. You can't stay in the dark place all the time. It's there.
Yeah.
But you can't stay down there. So, and it's easy to say those words to somebody who's going through it.
Yeah.
But if you can share that you went through that and you came out and you can talk about the struggle you were in and how God brought you through to the other side. And I talk about Ebenezer's, back in the day, back in the Old Testament, when God had the Israelites cross over the Jordan and do this. And when you get across, put this big pile of stones up as a memorial. Yeah. These are your Ebenezer's. And I think about that. I tell these guys, look, man, you've been a believer for all these years and you're going through a hard thing right now. You're getting ready to cross the Jordan. But remember last year when God did this? And remember the year before that? Remember when you guys were going through this thing, you and your wife? Remember when this happened to you in your business?
Yeah.
That's what we got to look back on. God's faithful. He did it before. And you got to stand on it. That's what you got. That's where your faith comes from. Your faith comes from proven things that God has done in your life. If God was not real, if God could not do these things, and if all that was going on was hope, I hope he's real. I hope he can do this. I have no evidence of it. I got evidence of it. And these are the things that I can use to encourage guys. These are the things I talk when you talk about me. And I'm getting excited. I'm talking fast. I apologize. But when you talk about my intentionality and mentoring young men, these are the things in my life that I can say, okay, John, Frank, this happening. The story you're telling me right now resonates with me because this is what happened in my life 35 years ago, and God did this. And now my wife and I are married 47 years, more in love than ever. I think she's not as tolerant with me as I'd like. She puts up with a lot of crap from me, man.
Well, it's so funny that
she's good. She's an awesome wife. You know her.
Oh yeah,
she's amazing.
She's amazing. She has such a huge heart for people, and she just loves people. Yes. Which I think you both have hearts that are like that you care and love for people. But when you were talking about her and saying that, I'm not sure if I love you anymore. Like I could hear her saying those things, but to have those things coming out of her mouth, would be very shocking. She's very kind and very tactful. To have her say that would be just mind blowing. Yeah. But one of the things that I really love about what you were just talking about was that we're all given tools in our life.
Yeah.
And the tools aren't tools necessarily that are given to you oh, look, I found a tool on the ground. They're tools that are either forged, that you have to create, or that they are created through circumstances, or they're tools that have been passed down from other people in your life who you become close with that have forged those tools in their own life. We forget a lot of the times, especially when we're younger, I think that we forget that the experiences that happen to us aren't necessarily for us. Right? Like some of the hardest times that I've experienced in my life, and I would imagine that you've experienced in your life, the lessons, yes, they have served us at some point, but they actually serve a greater purpose to teach other men, to teach other people of how to live life differently. How do you live in your marriage differently? How do you love your kids and train your kids? Man, I've loved our conversation. There's so much richness to everything that you've said. I do have one more question here before we kind of wrap up. And it has to do with your kids. I've gotten the privilege to meet your kids. It's weird to call them kids because they're not really.
They're kids.
They're kids.
They're older than you, but they're kids.
They're older than me, but they're kids. You're a grandparent. You're a father. There's times that I've found, and I've gotten the opportunity to speak with a lot of grandparents and parents. And there's a point in your child's life where you look at what they're doing and you say, man, I really wish that they would do this differently. And you can't really do anything. You have to let them make their decisions. You have to let them sleep in their own pile of manure that they make. And that's not to say your kids are sleeping in manure, but there are decisions that our children make that we look at them and go, man, could you just do the right thing? Could you just do it a little bit differently? And in those moments, even with my kids, they're still young and they make boneheaded decisions all the time. And I have to remind myself that they're just kids and I have to still love them. I'm curious because I think love is a huge component in your life. How do you continually display and show love to your kids, even when it's difficult sometimes with where their life is at?
The thing I've found to be key for me in that regard, Nathan, is because my kids were both adults. And when my kids were 12, I could tell them, don't do that. That's going to be dangerous. When they were 3, don't put your hand in the fire. That's not a good idea. When I was telling you before about my life experiences and the bumps on my head and all that kind of thing, banging my head against that wall, I show them the bumps on my head And when they were younger, I would say, why bang your head against that wall? I've already done that. And learn from the bumps on my head. Don't do it. But even right now, the best way I can relate to my children as a father of adult children is to be steadfast in who I am, be who I say I am, live up to my faith, live up to my word. I don't give them advice unless they ask for it. I made that mistake. And all that does is puts up walls between me and them. They don't hate me, but they don't talk to me. They won't come to me with another issue in the future because he's just going to give us advice or tell us what to do. Instead of just listening, like I was saying earlier, just listen. Just listen. Give them a space to talk and let them talk it out. But if they want my opinion, they'll ask me for it. If they want my advice, they'll ask me for it. The main thing is to be there for them.
Yeah.
Unless they're doing something dangerous
or illegal.
I won't jump in, but they're both going through tough stuff right now.
Yeah.
Which is uncomfortable to be on the outside of. But they both know that Melissa and I are there, that we're available, that we love them, that we're praying for them, that we help out wherever we can help out. And we don't judge. I try not to judge too much.
Do my best.
I do my best not to judge.
Yeah.
But that's a lesson that was a long time learning. Nathan was not to give advice, not to call, not to make the first move in that regard and say, here's what you should do, son or daughter. You know, in this situation, you're in here. Why are you doing it like that? Just do it this way.
I told you that this is what was going to happen.
Now, see, here's that
and
bump.
You didn't listen.
There's that bump on your head now. So things like that, I think that's the main thing. That's the main thing, Nathan, is being myself, maintaining my integrity with them, being who I say I am, and being steadfast, being faithful, being steadfast. They know that I'm this same guy I was yesterday. They know that Pop says this. They both call me Papa. That he says this, and that's what he means. I know he's not going to jump into my stuff, but I also know if I call him up, he'll be there. So that's what I found to be really key for me in being a parent of older children.
And I love the fact of just the idea of creating the space to allow your kids just to communicate. And as hard as it is to keep your mouth shut, to just be there. Yeah. I think a lot of times as parents, and I say this as a young parent, meaning I have kids that are young. I think a lot of parents...
You're also young.
Yeah. I have an old soul, from what I've been told. But to create that space where they can actually come in and communicate what's going on. Because I think as a parent, we always want to come up with the solution. We always want to fix the problem. We want to steer them in the right direction. We want to give them the life lesson right there and then. And at the end of the day, we have to remember as parents that it's not our job to change their heart. It's our job to facilitate an environment that God can change their heart.
Yes.
That God can change their behavior, that we can't. We want to influence the behavior as much as we can. But at the end of the day, God is the person that actually changed their heart. He's the actual catalyst in our kids' life.
Yes.
So I love that so much.
I don't want to see them hurt. You know, I don't want to see my kids going through hard times. I don't like to see them struggling unnecessarily. But reflecting on that as we're talking, you don't learn your lessons in life by somebody else shortcutting you through that lesson. The things I've learned the best are the things I had to learn the hard way. And that's a whole nother conversation for another time. You talked about tools and that kind of thing. That's a whole other conversation. I've got some very strong analogies in my own life. Being a tool guy, being a tradesman, growing up in a family of tradesmen. It's a short story, but...
So you actually grew up in a family of tradesmen then?
Yeah, my dad was a tooling engineer for an aircraft corporation down in San Diego. Both of my brothers are tradesmen. My cousins are all tradesmen. So
you have a heart for the trades then?
I do. And I'm a tool guy. So I grew up learning how to use tools, and I learned cabinet making from the ground up when I worked in the cabinet shops. As I've grown older, this is something that came to my mind a few years back, Nathan, in regards to my dad. Because for the longest time I hated my dad because of how he was acting, because of what he was doing to our family, because he was He was unrelational. When I have pictures in my mind of growing up when we were little kids, and all Christmas Day comes, and we're all on the floor with my mom opening our presents, and our dad sitting in his chair over in the corner, like watching everything. Distanced,
observing, not participating,
disconnected over here because he didn't know how to do it. This came to my mind a few years back, and I thought, because I reflect on these things a lot with people. Why? What limits people? Why do they act the way they do? And a lot of things. I think my dad reacted a lot in anger and frustration. Frustration causes anger, and I think he lived a lot of his life in frustration because. The best analogy I could learn from was that God has given us talents and abilities, a toolkit, so to speak, to get through our lives with, and we know how to use those tools. And not everybody has the same tools. So my dad, due to no fault of his own, grew up in the family he grew up in, which is also highly dysfunctional. He did not grow, he was not given or shown relational tools. So the best analogy I could think of was, as a cabinet guy, I've got the tools that I work with, hammers and saws and chisels and things like that are not good for going in and doing electrical work or plumbing.
You'll have a shocking experience.
Yes. And you'll be frustrated.
Yeah.
So if I go into a situation and try and fix a leaky pipe with a hammer and a chisel, I could likely do more damage in the process. My intentions are good.
Yeah.
I'm taking the tools I have to go fix this thing. But the tools I have are not the right tools. So I'm doing damage to the situation, and I'm becoming frustrated because all of my attempts are not working. And the more I try, the more frustrated I get. And the more frustrated I get, the more angry I get. Or the more frustrated I get, the more I drink, or whatever the case might be. So as time went by, my feelings about my dad changed, and I started to have more empathy towards him. I think this is how God has taught me empathy throughout my life. My dad didn't wake up in the morning thinking, how can I screw my family over today?
No one does.
He didn't do that. But he didn't have the relational tools to be a good dad or a good husband. So much of his life was in frustration, and my heart just changed towards him. He and I didn't get together for when I was a young father. We became estranged. I didn't talk to him for like 8 or 9 years. My youngest brother maintained a good relationship with him, and he told me, Dad would like to come see you today. He lived in Washington. I lived in San Diego. He was on a trip down to see us. Dad would like to come see you today and talk about some stuff. I'm thinking, I've been doing Taekwondo for 3 or 4 years, and I'm going to beat the shit out of this guy. Forgive my language. But that was in my mind, and I was ready because I was always been afraid of my dad. And my brother said, and Dad wanted me to talk to you first because he's afraid to come to your house. I said, I'm thinking he should be afraid. And my dad gets there, and my dad came and knocked on the door, and I was ready to open the door and plant him. My dad came to the door, and he had been in a couple of car accidents since I last saw him, and the lifestyle he led has taken its toll on his body. So I opened the door, and here was this, looked like an 85-year-old man out there in my front porch, and everything just drained. All that anger drained out of me. And I couldn't do it. And we just sat out in the front yard and visited. He didn't want to come in the house because he was still afraid. So he said, let's just sit out here in the front where the neighbors can see us.
So, where there's no weapons.
And lots of witnesses. So we went out there and talked. But like I say, that was the beginning of my understanding about my dad, was that, and it gave me more insight into other people too, Nathan, in that everybody else is the same in that regard. You have tools that I don't have, and vice versa. And the things that God has enabled you to do, and the things he's put on your heart that are your passions and your strengths and all that, are not the same as mine. That's why the body of Christ is made up of so many components, because all of us have different things to bring to the body, to contribute and benefit the body. Without each of us, the body's lacking. And it's the same thing with my dad, as I found out that he hasn't got those tools. And he hasn't got anybody else alongside of him that can complement, can be complementary to him and have those tools to help him with. So I think about that with a lot of people now. When I see guys that cut me off on the freeway and flip me off, and I'm thinking to myself, that guy's mad about something, but it's not me. So what has he got? What's the frustrations in his life right now? What's he unable to deal with that are causing him to react this way? It's just given me a different view into people.
Well, it's a huge perspective shift. We know people in our lives that walk around like that, where they attack everything and everyone, and it's always a fight for them. Not too long ago, we had someone on the show, and he was saying that it's so sad when you realize how hurt that person is because all they do is they lash out.
Yeah.
And there's a sadness and a compassion that kind of comes over you when you realize that. And everyone has some degree of hurt that they're carrying in their life, but those that are truly hurt, they hurt other people. We've heard that hurt people. I'm curious, how did your relationship with your dad change? Like, I would imagine at some point there was a forgiveness piece that came from you, maybe between you and your dad.
That's a funny thing too. My dad was pretty arrogant and egotistical and a narcissist and a whole lot of other words that can go along with that. Those things didn't change as he got older. My dad never said to me until he was dying. I went to visit him in the hospital when he was in the process of dying. And I never heard, I love you or I'm proud of you until that time. But again, I was thinking about my dad's limitations. So with his limited ability to be relational, I considered those things the same things with this. I took Scott up with me when I went up to see my dad so that Scott could see him too. And my dad had a respirator on. He was breathing through. He was intubated. So we were talking, and he was able to say a few things, but not a lot. I told him, he didn't ask for it, but I told him I forgave him for all the years, for all the way up till that time. And he made a face like, you got nothing to forgive me for. I didn't do anything. We came to a understanding of each other in my 40s or 50s. I understood his limitations, and I kept my expectations realistic. Don't expect birthday cards. Don't expect Christmas phone calls. Don't expect anything, and you won't be disappointed. Understanding those things, and that's not to say, Nate, that I wasn't hurt by these things. I was. I still wish we had had a better relationship, but I had other men in my life, older mentors, that were able to step in, that God provided for me, that were able to step in and kind of fill that role. It's still not the same as your dad, but the relationship is similar. So I had some guys that came alongside me. My stepdad is a peach. He's a great guy. He's of that generation. Yeah. So he's still a little tough, but he loves his family, and he's a good grandpa to the grandkids. So God's blessed me, man. I'm very fortunate. I'm blessed beyond what I deserve.
I love that so much. Mark, I really appreciate you coming on the show. I know that you guys have absolutely loved getting to know Mark and his story a little bit more. You can follow him on social media if you want. You don't post too much.
A little bit here and there.
A little bit here and there. What I love about this is I love that how you brought it up earlier that, I've had some pretty big heavy hitters, go-getters on the show. And what I love about their story is that, they put their feet down and they set their foot down and they run. They run hard. And that's great. But not everyone is like that. You may not be like that listening to this right now. You might be more like Mark, where it's about relationships. It's I don't know. I always see the surfer bum, kind of like, hey, relax, come on, man, chill. Yeah. Like it's all good.
Settle.
There's an energy about you of just kind of a relaxed nature to welcome in whatever's happening around you. And so you may resonate more with that. We all have different stories. We all have different personalities and styles. And what I love is that everyone has a story, and everyone has a story of who they were at one point in their life and how they have come to be who they are today. And I think it really shines for who you are today. I would say one of the biggest characteristics or words that I would use to describe Mark would be meek, strength, reserved.
Thank you, brother.
Is he's strong, but yet he's very kind, he's very gentle.
Thank you.
And he carries himself in such a way that you feel that. So for all of you listening, thank you so much for watching, for sharing this with a friend that you know who would enjoy the words that Mark had to say. Make sure you push the like button, put a comment in the comment section, and until next time, remember to be more, see more, and experience more than before.